Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the moment has finally arrived. After a 45-day theatrical window, the Batman has finally arrived on HBO Max, which means I actually got to watch it. So I have finally seen the Batman after many times of almost going to the theater, but then being too busy and the weather being all sucky and like my road flooding and stuff like that. I had a lot of trouble trying to get to see this movie, so I ended up having to wait until the movie came out on HBO Max, which it just did a couple days ago. And I watched it like the day it came out, and I had so much fun because I absolutely love this movie. I was absolutely insanely hyped for the Batman, and I already knew I was going to love it, especially based off everybody else's reviews and opinions that I've seen so far. But to actually get to sit down and watch it myself, that is something I was really excited for, and now I've finally done that, and it truly did live up to the hype. And so today we are finally going to be able to talk about the Batman. We can finally have this discussion. I can have this discussion with you guys, and you can let me know your own thoughts and, all that stuff in the comments below. What did you think about the Batman? I do want to give a spoiler warning if you haven't seen the movie yet. If you're like me and had to wait for it to come out on HBO Max, or maybe you're waiting for it to come out on physical media. Either way, spoiler warning, we are going to be talking spoilers in this video, and I'm also just so glad I get to finally do this video, because I literally, I think it was the week before the movie came out or something like that, when they released the official thing of you can write anything you want in the Batman font, like the logo font and stuff. I'm pretty sure that's when I made the thumbnail for this video, and I've had it saved this whole time. And, I've had a bunch of stuff saved for this video, just, taking up my camera roll. So I'm so glad I finally get to actually use this stuff and, clear up some space. But anyways, without further ado, let's jump into this and talk about The Batman, which is my favorite live-action Batman movie of all time. Honestly, probably favorite Batman movie overall, just in general. This is my favorite Batman movie. And, again, I kind of figured that would be the case going into this. Because honestly, at least in my personal opinion, I don't really like any of the other Batman movies. I mean, some of them are, really good. You look at The Dark Knight, for example. Obviously, that's, renowned as, not only a great Batman movie, but one of the best superhero movies of all time. And I do love that movie, but for me, personally, it just doesn't really feel like a Batman movie. It's a great movie, but it just doesn't feel like Batman to me, or at least the kind of Batman that I like. So I love this movie because it feels like Batman. This feels like what Batman should be, because, with the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy, it was a more grounded version of the character, and that's what we're also doing here, is a grounded version of Batman and Gotham City and all these DC characters, but they do it in a way that is grounded, yet still faithful to the comics, not only with these characters, but also just ties and references and Easter eggs and stuff in here. It's just so much fun when it comes to this movie of the Batman, and just everything that's being set up here in this universe, because we know, of course, this is a reboot. It's not, I guess you could call it a reboot, because it is separate from our main DCU. This is its own entity, and we're building our own little world here, not only with the Batman and hopefully future sequels as well. The sequel's already been confirmed, but also spin-off series on HBO Max, like the Gotham PD / Arkham series, whatever that's going to be. We're getting the Penguin HBO Max series. There's other possibilities in the future as well. And so I just love this world that has been set up here, specifically with Gotham City, because that has been one of the hardest things to get right when it comes to Batman movies in the past. Because you look at the Batman movies from the 90s, with Michael Keaton, the Tim Burton movies and all that stuff. That was a dark version of Gotham City, but still there was that was the more fantastical version of this. This is the grounded, realistic Gotham City that I want. Whereas the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy, it was a very bright, clean looking Gotham City, but this is the dark and gritty Gotham City that is just dirty and filled with crime, and this is what Gotham City should be. Also, another element here that I love is that this is a detective movie. This is a murder mystery type story, where you really get to see why they call Batman the world's greatest detective. You actually get to see him use his detective skills. And I always love just mysteries in general, but specifically when it comes to Batman, it can be really cool. And it was really cool in this film. So yeah, this is my favorite Batman movie. Overall, and now let's go ahead and talk about some of the characters in this film, but starting off with the main character, the Batman, of course, played by Robert Pattinson. Of course, this was a controversial casting because everybody was like, oh, that's the guy from Twilight, it's Vampire Boy. But he is an amazing Batman. Like, I love the way he portrays this character. Like, when he's in the Batsuit, like, the way he carries himself, his carriage, the way his eyes move and dart back and forth, it's just so cool, because this is a different version of Bruce Wayne. We'll talk about Bruce Wayne separately, but this is a more disturbed version of the character, and who he's still early in his years as Batman, so he's still getting used to things. But, like, there's this brutality to the character where he still has the no-kill rule, but he's very, very brutal in this film, and that's something that he learns by the end of this movie, that he can't just be vengeance. But I did love, especially how we're introduced to Batman in this movie, as he just walks out of the shadows. And I love the voiceover from Robert Pattinson, how it's like, you know, him writing in his journal or whatever. I like that voiceover throughout the film as kind of a narration. But I love how at the beginning, when, like, criminals fear the Batman, like, whenever the bat signal's out, even if the Batman isn't there, they see shadows and they get scared out of their mind, because it's like, oh no, is the Batman there? Like, I absolutely love that. Also, the suit, I mean, we've seen this, the suit reveal was years ago, but I still love this suit. This suit is so cool. The bat tech in this movie is great as well, because, you know, it's realistic and basic, and it's like, there's some parts here that are, like, kind of high tech for, like, you know, fancy bat tech, like for example, in the beginning when he had, like, when he was electrocuting that guy, that was pretty cool to see. The Batmobile as well was so cool, because again, it's a realistic version of the Batmobile, but it still looks cool. And also the introduction of it, how he was just there in the shadows, again, that utilization of the shadows was great here, and that whole car chase with the Penguin was really awesome. And I also love, with the whole vengeance thing, you know, when we saw that first trailer back at DC Fandom, we thought that was, like, the greatest line ever of, I'm vengeance, and, like, we just thought that was so cool. But I love how that's a full circle thing in this movie, how at the beginning of the movie, he's just being super brutal with those criminals, and he says, I'm vengeance, and you actually have that recurring thing throughout the film, like how Selina keeps calling him vengeance, and I think that's pretty cool, a little flirtatious there. But at the end of the movie, when we have that Riddler henchman, when they ask who he is, and he says, I'm vengeance, because Batman sees that kind of it's his fault. Like, sure, he became Batman to stop crime in the city, but a lot of these villains are inspired by him, and that's always been a big argument with this character. But now let's move on to talking about Bruce Wayne specifically, because this is a very different version of the character, and again, kind of controversial with this version of Bruce Wayne, because usually we know him as, like, the super rich playboy, but in this film he's an emo kid, and basically, but that's kind of cool how, you know, like, Alfred kind of plays a father role here, but he literally acts like a child. He's like, oh, I don't want to do that, like, I'm just brooding in my cave this whole time, and that's cool, because he is still disturbed. And, you know, obviously I want to see him as the rich playboy, because that's who Bruce Wayne is supposed to be, but the fact that this is only his second year as Batman, it makes sense that he's still at this stage, because he's still early in his career as Batman, so he needs time to learn to be that other version of Bruce Wayne, so that there's more distinctiveness between Batman and Bruce Wayne, because when he is Bruce Wayne in this movie, which honestly, most of the time he's Batman, but when he is Bruce Wayne, he's basically Batman. Now, as for Selina as Catwoman in this movie, we of course have Zoe Kravitz in the role, and I honestly think she's my favorite Catwoman. Obviously, Michelle Pfeiffer is, like, famous for being Catwoman in Batman Returns, and I do love that version, but I like this version of the character more, because I've always never really loved that version of Catwoman, because it's kind of weird and confusing of how, like, oh, she fell out a window, and then, like, the cats brought her back to life. I always thought that was weird. But this is a grounded version of the character where she is an actual cat burglar. And, you know, she's just a really cool character, because you have that romance and that flirtation between her and Batman. It's like, oh, the bat and the cat. And that was really cool. But also seeing how she can shine on her own. Like, she is an actual badass. And also having her connection with Annika in this movie as well. I thought that was interesting, having her storyline there. And she is a character that, again, can work on her own. And at the end of this movie, she does leave Gotham City. She goes over to Bloodhaven, where in the comics is actually where Nightwing hangs out and kind of resides. But I would definitely be interested in her getting her own spin-off series on HBO Max before her coming back to Gotham City and joining Batman once again. Now, speaking of Batman Returns, though, we also have a brand new version of the Penguin in this film, played by Colin Farrell, who's just absolutely unrecognizable, but he is one of my favorite parts of this movie. Like, first of all, he's just hilarious. Also, he looks great. I mean, he looks like the Penguin. The way he acts is just awesome. Like, he is this mob boss, but I like how this is kind of proto-Penguin. You know, he's not at the height of his power like he usually is as the Penguin. He is working under Carmine Falcone. It's not till the end of this movie, after Carmine dies, that he can now fully rise up to power, and we're going to see that, of course, explored in his spin-off series on HBO Max as well. But I just really loved it. It's also a very smart version of the character. Like, when they had the whole thing about, you are El Ratalada, and he knows Spanish, apparently. And so he was pointing that out. Like, I thought that was pretty funny. But just like with Catwoman, as much as I love Danny DeVito's Penguin, I think I like this one even more. And I'm really excited to see more of this character in the future, because he really wasn't even in the movie that much. But what we did see of him, I absolutely loved. Now, speaking of the mob and organized crime within Gotham City, we have Carmine Falcone, who, I like the character, but he doesn't really feel like Carmine Falcone to me, and I feel like that's mostly just because of the casting of John Turturro. I mean, he's a great actor, and he did great in the role, but when I think of Carmine Falcone, I kind of think of him as like this big, muscly, fat Italian guy with a mustache. And I mean, John Turturro did have a mustache in this film, but he just didn't look like Carmine Falcone, so that was a little distracting for me. And also, like, he didn't, like, just the way John Turturro looks, he doesn't look like the kind of guy that would do all those horrendous things. Like, he just didn't feel that evil. But he is revealed to be like kind of the big bad behind all this crazy stuff going on in Gotham City. And again, it wasn't that believable, at least for me. So I feel like he was miscast. But I did like the reveal that he's Selina's father, because that is a thing from the comics. So I kind of saw that coming, but still it was cool to see that, dipping into the lore of DC Comics with that connection. And also how he didn't know about it, and kind of that reveal at the end. And how she wanted to kill him and everything. I thought that was cool, but again, I just felt like the character was miscast, and like he didn't really feel like he had the presence that he should have in Gotham City. Now, while we're talking about big reveals in the Batman, let's talk about the Waynes, because going into this, a lot of us were already theorizing that there's going to be some sort of reveal that the Waynes were somehow corrupt and they weren't as squeaky clean as we thought they were, or at least as they usually are, and we do kind of get that, at least in a way. So, as for Thomas Wayne, we find out that he is kind of responsible for a man's death. He was running for mayor, and he wanted this reporter to be taken care of, so he enlisted the help of Carmine Falcone, not at all knowing he was going to go to the extreme measures of killing him, and actually to the point where when he found out about that, he was going to go to the cops, but then he ended up dead that night. He's a good man. Like, Thomas Wayne in this version, he's still a good man, but he just made a mistake. But we do have that other side of it, though, with Martha Wayne, with how she was an Arkham, which is another thing from the comics as well, which I thought was really cool how they tied that into this, because that was the big thing that they were trying to cover up here with Thomas Wayne's mayoral campaign. Because, the fact that your wife's mother murdered her husband and then committed suicide herself, and then also that Martha Wayne herself actually spent some time in mental institutions as well, and was also a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs as well. That's kind of not the thing you want to have come out during the time that you're running for mayor. So I thought that was really cool, though, especially because then it kind of explains, like, Bruce Wayne, for a guy, like, he's a guy that dresses up as a bat and goes around beating up people at night. Like, you can't be mentally stable to actually do that. So that is kind of something explains it here, that Bruce Wayne, Batman, he's a little mentally unstable as well, which I think works with the character, especially given, how Bruce Wayne is represented in this movie. But now the Riddler, our main villain of this film, Paul Dano as Edward Nashton, aka the Riddler. And I love this guy because, he's not a physical threat. That's not what the Riddler is supposed to be. He's supposed to be a mental threat. And so there were a lot of twists and turns with this character that I really like. First of all, just playing up the whole horror aspect with this character, the fact that he is a serial killer, and the ways he goes about doing this, like with his riddles and his traps and stuff, I thought were really clever and really demented at the same time as well. But I also love like that opening scene when he's just there in the shadows and then all of a sudden he just like strikes and, murders the mayor. That was really cool. He was a really creepy, imposing threat, especially because he was a behind the scenes villain. He was always several steps ahead of Batman, always had these things pre-planned. And is the fact that we only had one scene between Batman and the Riddler in this movie, which is absolutely unheard of only having one scene between the main hero and the main villain in the movie. That's just completely insane. But it happened here and it worked so well. Because that one scene was one of my favorite scenes of the movie, because there's so much revealed there of this version of the Riddler. Because up until this point, he's kind of played off as like this super serious, dark, sadistic serial killer who wants to expose Gotham City. But, there were little hints here and there throughout the beginning of the film, but especially during this part, you get to see how eccentric this character is, like the way he says Bruce Wayne, like, I love that. And, that's part of who the Riddler is in the comics. So I love that they're bringing in that eccentricness to the Riddler. And the fact that he was inspired by Batman, again, it's kind of like who came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, it's the same thing here. Who came first? Batman or the villains? Are the villains coming out because of Batman, or did Batman come because of the villains? And this movie makes it look like all these villains are showing up because of Batman, because he wanted to be friends. And, I love how, Bruce Wayne was one of his targets, and throughout much of this movie, I thought that Riddler figured it out, that Bruce Wayne is Batman, but no, then you have that line where he says, like, Bruce Wayne, and he keeps repeating Bruce Wayne throughout that scene, and Batman thinks, like, oh, great, I'm exposed, like, the camera's right there and everything, but then he says, like, is the one that got away. And so he, at least as far as we're aware, does not know that Bruce Wayne is Batman. And I like that because, it was kind of back and forth of, like, does he or does he not? I love that. And then I loved even more how he had this online presence. It was kind of funny though too, how they were like, oh, he has 500 followers, and then when he had that video and he sat down and he was like, oh, hi guys, thanks for the comments. That was hilarious, honestly. But it worked because it's kind of like he finally found his friends, and I love that though too, because even after he was in prison, like his plan still went into motion, and that was part of his plan, was to get caught. And I didn't at all see that coming with the kind of multiple Riddlers at the end of this movie with his goons, because I remember as I was watching the movie, I remembered seeing that scene in the trailer with the Riddler at the top of the arena with the rifle, so I figured like, oh, okay, Riddler got arrested, at some point he's going to break out and then he'll have his final battle with Batman, but no, he doesn't. He is in prison for the rest of that movie, and it's his goons who go out and do that, and that was just absolutely insane, because it was not at all something I saw coming, but also just because it looked cool having like that many Riddlers. I think that was visually a really cool fight with Batman. But yeah, Riddler was great and is absolutely one of my all-time favorite Batman movie villains. Also in this film, we have Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon, Lieutenant Jim Gordon. So he's not commissioner yet, although given the fact that the commissioner is murdered in this movie, maybe he's got the opening, he's got a good shot at that. Oh, but I love this character. There's not really much to say about him, but I loved his relationship with Batman. Like, they were, a crime-fighting duo. Like, they were the dynamic duo, basically, and they were, like, going around, trying to solve the mystery together. I really loved their relationship. I love how he stood up for Batman when everybody else in the GCPD was afraid of him. I love that, and I love Jeffrey Wright's portrayal here, and I'm excited to see more of him in the future. Now, a character that I was both disappointed in and really enjoyed this movie was Alfred. We had Andy Serkis as Alfred, and the only thing I didn't like about this character is just that we didn't see enough of him. I wish he was in the movie more, because it's a different version of Alfred as well, because this is a version of Alfred where he has that military background and how he actually taught Bruce how to fight and all this stuff, and I thought that was really cool. But I feel like, when there was that scare of like, oh my god, Alfred's about to die, and luckily he didn't, but I mean, he almost did. But when he ends up in the hospital, like, you know, you can see the emotion from Robert Pattinson as Bruce, and that's due to his amazing performance in this film. But I wish there was more time to kind of get to see their relationship and actually make us care about the relationship and see that it is kind of a father-son relationship between the two of them. But then again, that hospital scene with Bruce and Alfred is another one of my favorites of the movie. Now, finally, one of the biggest things people were talking about this movie is the Joker. We have that ending scene with Barry Keoghan's Joker talking to the Riddler in Arkham Asylum. And since then, we've also had, of course, the release of the official deleted scene, that interaction between Batman and Joker. And I made a separate video about that a couple weeks ago, so definitely make sure to check that out. I go more in depth on that. And I'm not a big fan of this scene, like, just from, like, I understand now, like, why, when I was watching reviews and stuff, when people were talking about the Joker in this movie, a lot of people weren't really a fan of it, because, yeah, it's not really a good representation of the Joker in this scene. But then you watch that deleted scene, and, like, I absolutely love this Joker. But I like Barry Keoghan the role. I like the look. I like his laugh. I like all that stuff. But I'm really interested by this whole thing of, you know, they're looking for a friend. Now we're getting this team up between the Joker and the Riddler. And I'm interested to see how far this goes, because we know that the Joker isn't going to be the main villain of, like, the next movie or possibly even the third movie or anything like that. I believe the rumor is currently that he's going to have a big role in that Gotham PD Arkham Asylum HBO Max series. So that's something I'm definitely excited and interested to see. But when it comes to this team up with the Riddler, this is something that gets me really excited, though, because I always love seeing villains team up. That's why I love things like the Sinister Six and, like, the Legion of Doom and stuff like that. So it makes me interested to see, like, is it going to just be the Joker and the Riddler? Like, are we going to get, like, the War of Jokes and Riddles storyline from the comics? Or will this be a much bigger thing that we're building up to, where maybe if we have the main villain of the next movie, let's say is Mr. Freeze, hopefully, fingers crossed, say that then after that we get a post-credit scene or something along those lines, some sort of scene like this, where we have, all right, now it's a team up of Joker, Riddler, and Mr. Freeze. And, like, we keep building up this team of villains to then we finally get to this big kind of crossover at the end where we have all these villains coming back. Because that's another thing I think is really cool here, is that they kept Riddler alive. They don't make that same mistake that I always hate when they kill off their villains in superhero movies and then they can never bring them back. I love when they bring back villains, and that is exactly what I hope they do right here. And they could build up to a really big kind of ending to this trilogy or franchise, whatever, whenever they want to do that. There's a lot of opportunity there. But guys, that is The Batman. Again, it is finally out on HBO Max, so even if you already saw it in theaters, make sure to go check it out on HBO Max for the second or third, 26th time, however many you want to watch The Batman, because it really is a great movie and is by far my favorite Batman movie, with my favorite Batman and my favorite Catwoman and my favorite Penguin and my favorite Riddler. I really love this movie, and I'm really excited to see where things go here, not only with The Batman 2, the sequel, which, by the way, I am going to be doing a separate video talking about what I want to see in the sequel and where I want to see things go from here, with villains and ideas and possibly Robin and all that stuff. So definitely make sure to look out for that video. But I'm excited to see where things go here in the future of The Batman. But guys, for now, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think about The Batman? Let me know all your thoughts and theories for the future projects in this universe with the sequel and the spin-offs on HBO Max. But for now, thanks so much for watching. Please drop a like if you enjoyed this video and hit the subscribe button so I can keep you up to date on everything that goes on in the DC life.